Thank you again for joining us. I'm excited to speak to Matt today about all the things that he's been doing in the past year and currently. Matt DiCarlo is currently the resident director for Moulin Rouge on Broadway and the associate director for the show's upcoming North American tour. He staged the Off-Broadway production and North American tour of The Play That Goes Wrong and recently returned from South Korea, where he restaged the Broadway production of Beetlejuice for its run in Seoul at the Sejong Center for the Performing Arts. Matt was the associate director for the first national tour of The Color Purple revival and the second national tour of Rock of Ages. As a production stage manager, Matt helmed the Broadway productions of Beetlejuice, The Play That Goes Wrong, the Tony-winning revival of The Color Purple, Honeymoon in Vegas, and Rock of Ages. He also worked as the PSM for the world premiere of A Walk on the Moon, Up Here, and A Piece of My Heart, the Bert Berns Story, and the Bert Berns Story. Other stage management credits include Broadway Bares 2017, Broadway Backwards 6, 7, and 8, and over 12 productions at Paper Mill Playhouse, including The Sound of Music, Peter Pan, Steel Magnolias, Little Shop of Horrors, and The Full Monty. Matt's corporate event experience includes projects with Empire Entertainment, David Stark Design, and Civic Entertainment. Favorites include events with Target, McDonald's, and the AMC Upfronts. Matt is currently on the faculty at Columbia University and has guest lectured at several universities, including Yale and Carnegie Mellon. He graduated with a BFA from Mason Gross School of the Arts at Rutgers University. Matt, welcome to Theatre Art Life.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It's amazing. I mean, you have packed so much into your career thus far. That's a long bio.
I was laughing, thinking, oh, this could be so much shorter.
Yeah.
It was a long
No, it's nice because I think it's really good to see that, you know, where you've come from and now you've moved into directing in the last few years. And I think it's just a wonderful career trajectory that you've had. Although I did see on social media a while ago, you posted something of you producing plays as a child in your backyard. I think that's amazing.
It is a important, I think, an important part of my journey. I took those backyard shows so seriously, and that sort of launched all of it for me. So
I think it's great that you knew exactly what you were wanting to do back then, even then, in taking it seriously and putting. And I think from the pictures that you had, you could tell it was a serious production. This was all organized.
It's so true.
So I want to start with. I'd like you to tell us about your trip to South Korea and the restaging of Beetlejuice over there. That must have been quite an experience, especially in the middle of a pandemic.
It was. There were so many times in the months leading up to that I would think it wasn't going to happen. I kept thinking, there's no way that we're actually going to get like a creative team from America over there, that we're going to mount this huge show, that audiences are going to be able to come see it. I kept thinking something would happen to get in its way, like things had been getting in everything's way, it felt like. And it was just so unbelievable to be in Korea and to work with the local team there and the Korean cast, and to experience theater during the pandemic in a way that I never imagined I would have been able to, just because it never really stopped in Korea. And that's the craziest thing about it, is that as everything sort of shut down here at home for me, and it felt like all over the world, it didn't there. And they sort of had been doing this and producing theater for the entirety of the shutdown. And so by the time we got there with Beetlejuice, it seems like the city had sort of figured out how to do it. And we were just a little bit at the mercy of the COVID cases and the sort of rising and falling of those numbers. But they really had figured out a way to manage the pandemic in a way that made everybody feel safe.
Mm. And what was it like? So you basically, until you got that ticket and you were jumping on the plane, you probably didn't expect it to happen. And then when you got here into Korea, I'm on this side of the world, so I say here, what were some of the cultural challenges that you encountered? Like, what were some things that you had expected that you didn't expect that you had to deal with over there?
Well, the hardest part of being over there was the 2-week quarantine. I mean, getting to Korea and being sort of locked in a hotel room for 2 weeks was not my favorite part of the journey, I'd say. I think as much as I could have prepared myself for what my experience would be in Korea, there was no way to fully understand it until I was there doing it. And it was unbelievably eye-opening to be one of the only people in the room that spoke English, and recreating a show that I know so well, but in a completely different way, in a completely different language, with a translation that doesn't exactly match the version of the show that's done in English. And in the beginning, it took me a second to figure out how the interaction would work between me and the company and my translator, and Connor Gallagher and Chris Kukul, the choreographer and music director of Beetlejuice, were over there with me at the beginning. The rest of the team didn't sort of join us till later, but it certainly took us a couple days to find our rhythm in the room. I was amazed at how similarly run the process was, how the days were structured, how the PSM and her team facilitated our work, just how everybody operated was so much more similar than I imagined it would be. And it was amazing as the weeks went on, how the barrier of the language difference started to melt away a little bit. And it just became the way that we all communicated, as the weeks went on. The cast started to get a little more courageous at trying English. I got a little more courageous at trying to communicate with the little Korean that I knew. We all got better at gesturing at each other while we were having conversations. And by the time I left, it was as if we all were speaking the same language. We completely got so used to the way we communicated that it became completely normal. The city is unbelievably, it's a respectful city. It's a city full of culture. It's a city full of kindness and generosity. I don't know that I've ever experienced an overwhelming sense of generosity, respect, gratitude, all of those things like I experienced my entire time in Korea. And that was at work, outside of work. The city's spotless. The city is unbelievably mindful of each other. It's a very much a put your community before you mentality. And so coming from somewhere like the US, where it seems sometimes like a free-for-all in terms of what people decide to do in terms of following rules and mask mandates and things like that, it was like never a question. Like if the rule at any given place or any given time was everybody has to wear a mask, in Seoul, everybody wore a mask, and that was that. There was no discussion about that. There was no one who ever would defy that. And that was eye-opening. And I wish I could impart some of that here sometimes. But I just had the best time. Every process has its challenges, and certainly Beetlejuice in Korea had its obstacles that we had to mount over our time, just like you would doing any show. But I would go back to Seoul in a second. I can't wait to go back. And I am forever grateful to the team at CJE&M and Warner Brothers for helping us do such a monumental thing at such a challenging time.
That's amazing. Also, I kind of wanted to ask you, though, so you're able to communicate over time and have that barrier of pull down the barriers of the language. But what about directing from an artistic perspective? Like, the nuances of how you would say that expression or how you would speak that. And if you're doing it in a different language, did it literally translate? Or I mean, how did you get that nuance of that from an artistic?
It's such a good question. And it was one of the things I was most curious about, especially because of the show that I happened to be over there doing. Beetlejuice is unbelievably baked in American culture. It's a Western show. It's got an American sensibility. The Broadway version of it has a style of humor that is unbelievably American. The tone of the jokes, the way the show is written. And that went through a huge shift when the Korean translation was done. And it continued while we were in rehearsal. A little bit like doing a new show, you know, nothing directly translates. And so lyrics that have to fit in a certain amount of bars or syllables can't possibly be the same because the language is so completely different. So as I was navigating that, as we were, you know, working our way through the show, as the cast was learning the show, I was leaning heavily on the local resident director. Solin Shim was her name. She's unbelievable. She really understood the show. And we would talk all day long about the original intention of a moment. Does this work? Is the joke right? Have we set it up right? Sometimes in the Korean language and in the vernacular, things are set up differently. So the structure of a joke in English needs a different construct in Korean to make it work. And so she was amazing. And the woman who translated the book, Suvin, was incredible. And she really understood the style and actually really understood what we needed to do to make the show work in Korean. Certainly, the sort of dark comedy and dirty jokes of it all do not play in front of Korean audiences. And so we had to do a rethink, and we were all constantly looking at where is the line? How do we get right up to it? How do we not go past it? The same things that we would have, the same conversations we would have about the show in English, I found myself having in Korean, but not really have any idea myself what would work. And that was like a really vulnerable position to be in.
Totally.
We had an unbelievable cast of skilled musical theater comedians who also were really instrumental in that. The other thing is that in Korea, it's standard to double and or triple cast a lot of the roles. And so all of our principals were double cast. So there were 2 Beetlejuices, 2 Lydias, 2 Barbaras, et cetera, et cetera. Those actors were also really useful in understanding what the intention was and what may or may not work. They're also all pros at Western musicals that have made the Korean jump and are doing a translated version. And everybody in the room seemed to really understand that, which made it so much easier for me. And it was fascinating. And giving it, you know, scene work notes and adjustments and talking about character and intention and pacing. It's all so interesting. It was sort of about refiguring out how I like to direct and how I like to work with people, because so much of it, I needed to take, I needed to sort of hear from them what played and what didn't. But again, as the weeks went on, as time went on, it was incredible how much I learned about the scenes in Korean, what worked, what didn't, where they were in this. I could always tell exactly where they were in the scene. We had unbelievable sort of deep conversations about character. My translator was always 2 steps ahead of me. It was remarkable. I could write a book about it. It was great.
What a wonderful process, and how fortunate that you're able to experience that. I think that's that's a big growth point as a director, to be able to work through that. It's constantly a fascination for me to, like that, living as an expat here with people who have different culture around me. We know people think differently. What people like is different to what I like. And you're constantly, when you're doing shows in this part of the world, trying to adjust your baseline to be able to create something that people are going to enjoy. And that's a fascinating process.
Yeah, it was. It was eye-opening in so many ways. And one of those experiences that will inform every experience I have forever. It was so singular. And I hope I get to do it again someday. I can't wait. Yeah.
And I think it's great. I mean, Eleanor asked if were you in Seoul? So yes, he was in Seoul. And the thing about South Korea, they are big fans of Broadway theatre, and it's one of the hubs of Broadway shows in this part of the world that really take it from the States and want to see it. They want to translate it. They want to have it there. They've been running Cats for like years. Like, you know, this. I love it.
While I was over there, I saw Wicked. I saw Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet. I saw Chicago. I mean, musical theater is alive and well in Seoul, and they have such a respect for the art form.
That's it.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit. So the situation of COVID over there, you mentioned was handled quite well and things were quite functional. But on a day-to-day basis with the actual you guys working, what sort of protocols and things were put in place to keep people safe?
Yes, we had weekly COVID tests. And we had our temperature checked every time we came in and out of the rehearsal studio. So in the morning after lunch, you would do that. You would log that in. And we wore masks in rehearsal unless we were doing a run of the show, in which case the actors took theirs off. We kept ours on. And then once we were at the theater, the actors, of course, had their masks off, but everybody else was masked. While I was in Korea, it was fairly standard that everywhere, unless you were outside or at a restaurant or a bar, masks were on. So it was, you know, it was no different for us. Certainly doing what we do, it was challenging at times to not ever be able to see the actors'
people's expressions.
And so every once in a while, I would sort of ask permission from the powers that be, like, can we do this once with masks down just so I make sure we're on the right path? That was always allowed. Connor, Chris, and I, in the beginning, were the only people who were vaccinated in the room because the vaccine hadn't quite been rolling out there. While we were in rehearsal, for the period that we were in rehearsal, which was a long time, 7 weeks, people in the cast started to get vaccinated. So a couple of them were vaccinated by the time I left. But again, the vaccine was sort of rolling out in a different way in Korea than here. So I felt really fortunate to be vaccinated. Turns out, didn't really affect anything in Korea because at the time they were like, that vaccine that you have isn't approved here yet. So it actually is like you're not vaccinated. So being vaccinated didn't make a difference during my time in Korea the way it does here.
So you had no special privileges because you were vaccinated.
I wish I did. I did not.
So what did you get to do anything fun outside while in South Korea? I mean, like you said, it's such a different culture. It's good to get out and see it and experience it. Right?
We tried. I certainly did some of the touristy things that we could do. Went to the towers, went to the palaces, you know, visited a lot of parks, visited all of the sort of cool districts. There's so many different, Gangnam, Insadong, so many different cool areas in Seoul to explore. We did all of that. We went to the demilitarized zone one day. Like, we tried to do all of the things we were able to do. But the COVID restrictions sort of dictated some of that. And we were trying to be careful. I didn't ever want to do anything that I felt like could jeopardize the show. I never wanted to be the one who was a positive COVID case. So I was mindful of that. Had a lot of amazing Korean food, did a lot of Korean shopping. And we went to a huge amusement park, Everland, one day, Connor and I, and that was a blast. So we did a lot of things. Most things involved being outside because it felt the safest. But we did try to experience as much of the city as we could because it is such a cool city.
Right, that's awesome. So when you're preparing to go mount the production, what was sort of the pre-work that you did? Tell us a little bit about the director process of going, okay, I'm going to Korea and I'm going to mount this Korean version of Beetlejuice. I mean, where do you start?
That is a great question. I have recreated several shows here in the States. I've been fortunate enough to rebuild and redirect and remake many of the shows that I've PSM'd in productions in English in North America. Mm-hmm. The idea of recreating a show is something I felt like I had a really good understanding of. The most interesting thing was, I'm recreating it in Korean. So what does that do to this process, and how do I make that work? And luckily, I in addition to all of the time I had at home before I left, I had 2 weeks locked in a hotel room in Korea to really sort of focus on it. All of our casting was done remotely because we couldn't go over there and cast because of the parameters around quarantine. It would have been crazy to sort of go quarantine for 2 weeks, be in final auditions for a week, come home, come back, quarantine for 2 weeks. Nuts. So we did all of our casting remote. That was interesting. And certainly not a way that I would want to cast the show. The producers, though, were amazing about the way that they videotaped auditions, were able to give us feedback. I Zoomed with a couple of the performers with a translator so that we could make adjustments and they could retape. I mean, it was really, really as smooth as the process could have been. Then Connor, the choreographer, and I ended up needing to take the script and score once it was translated and start to figure out how we were going to restage the show with the Korean translation. These lyrics actually don't make any sense with the choreography because it's completely different lyrics. So we have to rethink this. I have to relook at this scene because the blocking is not quite going to work with the new construct of this. The sight lines in the theater are different than Broadway. I've got to move people downstage over here. All things like that. We also did a little bit of restructuring in the ensemble to sort of try that out while we were in Korea. So there was some work there in terms of what people did what in some of the smaller roles. But it was, I sort of would just like lay everything out. I had my sort of show Bible that I created when the show was running in America. I had the Korean back translation, which is like the English version of the Korean version. And then I sort of had like every possible ground plan and chart and picture possible that I would use to sort of piece the show back together. And that's how I started. We were doing a replica. So everything, the costumes and the set were being built in Korea, but they were meant to be replicas of the Broadway stuff. Right. And then the puppets were shipped from America to Korea for that run. So I knew those were coming over. And that's where we started.
That's amazing. That's such a fascinating process. Really interesting. Yeah. And so then you got to opening night. I mean, what was it like to experience, that, and what was the audience reaction to Beetlejuice when you opened it up?
It was good. Our opening was delayed. We had, not because of COVID, we had some big technical challenges to navigate with the physical production, with the set, with the automation, everything surrounding that stuff pushed our opening a bit. So we were all there a little bit longer than we thought. We didn't have a traditional sort of preview process, so we just sort of like started. And audiences are so different in Korea than they are in America. I think of American audiences very specifically for a show like Beetlejuice as loud, boisterous, enthusiastic, vocal. Like Americans are not afraid to like, woo, all that.
Yeah.
In Korea, it's like, it was an unbelievably respectful audience. I learned that when I went to go see other shows, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm watching Wicked. I'm so used to the audience going crazy after The Wizard and I. Like, I'm so used to them laughing out loud for 30 seconds after Glinda makes that. And here, it is like very polite clapping and maybe a chuckle. What on earth are they going to think of Beetlejuice? That's like what I kept thinking. And the audiences really liked it. We got such great feedback. And it seemed like the crowds and the critics really responded to the show in a positive way. The energy in the theater felt, of course, different to me than I'm used to experiencing the show in, but I had to wrap my brain around the fact that that was not a barometer of whether or not they liked it in the same way that it is at home. And we were all really happy with the audience's response. They really responded to it. The producers kept telling us it's such a different kind of show than they're used to in Korea. And that really became true. The exciting thing is that audiences seem to really embrace it and are sort of excited for it to come back, shows cycle through life in Korea. So hopefully in the next year or two, Beetlejuice will do a return engagement because fans loved it. And I think had we not been navigating a pandemic, I think, tickets, everything would have been bigger, more if we weren't in the middle of COVID.
Yeah. And so how long was the run over there? It
was meant to be 9 weeks and it ended up being 6.
Right. Because of the pandemic and all that. Yeah. Amazing. And I saw you in a pink suit. Was that on the opening night? Tell us about that.
I was in, my suit was like very light tan. Connor's was pink. They looked similar,
somebody had a pink suit.
And Chris's was blue. We looked like a K-pop band. We realized that. But one of our lead actors, Chung Sung-hwa, who was one of our 2 Beetlejuices, unbelievably generously gifted us custom suits and picked them out and had us fitted and accessorized and the whole 9 yards. And those were the
That's amazing. I love it. You did look like a K-pop band, but I was so impressed that you embraced it and you're out there rocking the suits.
Oh my gosh, I've even worn it since I've been home. I wore it to a wedding.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it fits like a glove. It's like the perfect suit.
Oh, there's nothing like a tailor-made suit, that's for sure.
Oh, the best.
So moving on to Moulin Rouge, how exciting to be the resident director for this show. And so you're in the middle of remounting this now. You're less than a couple of weeks from opening. How did you get that role moving on from Beetlejuice? How did that happen? And what's the process like now?
Yeah, it is really exciting. I'm so glad to be there. I'm new to Moulin Rouge. I was not involved with it before this. I was meant to start a bit earlier, but the pandemic delayed everything a bit. Alex Timbers, who directed Beetlejuice, also directs Moulin Rouge. And our partnership and our relationship and our collaboration and our friendship all goes back many, many years to before Beetlejuice. Alex, I've PSM'd for him several times, and he's also known me as someone who's always directing a version of this or directing this and doing this while I'm PSMing something else. And he asked me if I would be interested in joining Moulin Rouge in this type of capacity. They were expanding their teams as their worldwide rollout begins. And the original associate director of the show, Ashley Rodborough, was stepping into a sort of supervisory position as the show did its rollout. They were looking for someone to be the resident for the Broadway production and on the tour. He knew I was looking to maybe make a career move in that way. And these full-time jobs as, resident directors of shows don't exist on every show here in America. It's not as common. So I jumped at it. It's like a dream job for me. And I've had the greatest time learning the show. And I spent a lot of time during the pandemic learning as much as I could about Moulin Rouge digitally with videos and charts and paperwork and meetings and Zooms and all of that stuff. It's been amazing to finally be in the room. And we start tech tomorrow. And I can't wait. We open on Broadway, reopen, I should say, September 24th with a new leading lady and about 11 other new company members and a new resident choreographer, in addition to myself, who's the resident director. And we start rehearsal for the North American tour in January.
Wow. And the North American tour will be a different group of people. Is that
That's right? So we will we'll rehearse a new company into the show that will do the North American tour while the Broadway company stays running.
What's the difference about preparing a show for Broadway versus a Chauffeur Tour?
That is, it varies from show to show. I think usually the more complicated your show is, the more adjustments you make for the tour. Of course, the tour always has to be able to like pack up in a truck and go. It's just a matter of how many trucks there are and how much you're moving. I work a lot with the show, The Play That Goes Wrong. That show has toured many times. It's also sits places. But that's always a barometer for me in that it seems like such a simple thing. It's a unit set and takes place all in one location with eight actors and 2 stage managers. It's unbelievably complicated to tour a show like that because it's all made to fall apart. And in order to make something fall apart, it has to be really structurally sound to be able to safely do that. And it's been so interesting to sort of watch that show and learn about it as we've sent it out on the road and built other productions of it. Often, too, when making a tour, everybody has a chance to sort of take another look at the show, and you're often making your show have to expand in a way that it's playing in venues that are double and triple the size of some of the theaters they play in New York.
Of course, because Broadway theaters are so small, right? So
yeah, that Moulin Rouge is at the Al Hirschfeld. The Color Purple was at the Jacobs. That's a good example. The Color Purple played the Jacobs Theater on Broadway, which is just about 1,000 seats. When we sent that show on the road the first year, I remember calling John Doyle from where we were teching. He hadn't gotten there yet. And I said, John, just so you know, like this 2,500 seat theater really feels like 2,500 seats. And with that show, we were always interested in like pulling it as far downstage over the orchestra pit in as many venues as we could to get it as close to the audience as possible. To recreate as much of what we could capture from the Broadway production. But every show has its challenges and has its differences when you're getting ready to send it out on the road. Often it's all about the show's proximity to the audience, its relationship to the audience, and how it will function as a show that needs to pack up into road trucks and into trailers.
Is it common for the cast to be smaller size for the purposes of touring, or does it usually go out with the same number of cast as a Broadway show?
Some shows do try to do a few less tracks than, so to speak, than you have on Broadway, but it's always a balance and it's always a dance, because what you never want to do is have a show on the road that all of a sudden doesn't have enough covers or something. And then you're undercovered when you're in the middle of the country. It's a little bit easier on Broadway when your show's been running. Maybe there's a couple people who aren't in the show anymore that know it in case of an emergency. You can people are living at home, so you can have an extra swing. On the road, you never want to be in a position where you don't have enough coverage. So for Moulin Rouge on the tour, we actually have a couple less on stage tracks than we do on Broadway, but more covers off stage. So it all sort of depends on the makeup of your show. The Play That Goes Wrong travels with the exact same number of people that it does everywhere, because we can't really do it with less. Color Purple, we traveled with one less understudy.
Right. And is Moulin Rouge, particularly from a technical perspective, complicated? Is there lots of automation? I mean, I haven't seen it. So
Moulin Rouge is massive, I would say. It's a big, there's a lot to it, and it's a lot of scenery and a lot of people and a lot of effects and a lot of automation. The Broadway production has a passerelle and people seat in between the passerelle and the stage. I mean, it's certainly immersive on Broadway in that way. So there's a lot of sort of rethinking as we get ready to send it out on the road.
Oh, that's amazing. And coming back from the career, and now you're in the US, and we again sort of circulating back into the COVID protocol. What sort of protocol are you adhering to in New York right now in terms of managing the pandemic?
Yeah, everybody here to work on Moulin Rouge and most Broadway shows, I think, if not all, we have to be fully vaccinated. It's a fully vaccinated company. We get COVID tested twice a week. And everybody who can wear a mask at work wears one. those are sort of the big rules that we have. And it's been working well for us. We fill out little health safety app thing every day on our way into work, temperature checks, all those normal things. But the big things are everybody's vaccinated. We wear masks when we can. We get tested twice a week. And the audiences have to be vaccinated and masked.
Yeah. I mean, that was a recent addition, wasn't it? A recent mandate. Yeah. And I think people in especially the performing arts, and I guess especially on Broadway, are going to just do whatever is requested of them so that they can get back to work, right? Like, let's just do it. Yeah. I think other people who don't work in the industry and haven't been necessarily affected by the pandemic so directly as our industry have less of a motivation to maybe do that. But I think our industry is like whatever it takes.
Yep, exactly. It's like whatever we have to do, we'll just do it. It feels like that.
Yeah. And what do you think will be different post-COVID on Broadway? I know that during the downtime, there's been a lot more discussion about equity, diversity, representation, working hours. That, you know, when people have had a time to sit down and think about their work and life while the pandemic was on, certainly a lot of ideas came up. And do you think anything's going to shift beyond the pandemic when everything gets back to normal?
I hope so. As a sort of eternal optimist and a glass half full human being, I believe it will. I, like everyone, had a lot of time to sort of sit back and reflect and look at the world and the industry that I call home. I think it has to change. I think it's time for it to change. I don't think change is ever fast. And I think that things are going to take time. I think there are things that are happening immediately that will feel different. And I think that there are things that we all need to invest in a little bit as a community to change. I think, in terms of work-life balance and people's health and mental health, I think that there is certainly so much more of an awareness about all of that because we've all had so much time when we weren't working, and I personally know for the first time what it feels like to really exhale, really relax, really be able to shut my brain off. I know what it feels like to have several days off in a row, not just one. I know what it feels like to eat dinner at a normal hour. I know what it feels like to see my fiance more than at midnight. All those things. I know what it's like to see my family more. I know what it's like to play with my dog more. He's barking right now.
Yeah, we hear him. It's awesome.
I think that because of that awareness, I think things are going to shift. There's a big push right now to get rid of 10 out of 12s. And I feel many ways about that. As someone who sat in many different seats in the theater and navigated tech, I feel many ways about 10 out of 12s. And I definitely see a world where if they go away, everybody will feel better and function better. In terms of equity, diversity, and inclusion, my God, I hope things change. I think that it was a long time, and I say this from a privileged position, right? I am the white male who has been very fortunate in my time, and I think it's really time for people to take a step away and take a bigger look at things. And I mean the people who make big decisions and also the people who make smaller decisions, and make sure that we are fully representing our community and our world. I think as theater makers and storytellers, it's our job to be a mirror to the society that we're telling stories to and telling stories about. And I don't know that we're always good at that. I think it's time to really make sure that the stories are being told by the people who should be telling them, not just the people who always tell the stories. And I think it's time for everybody to take a look at that. And I think as people on the production teams and the creative teams, it's our jobs to make sure that we are doing our best to make sure that the management and that the creative team reflects all of that. So I think that there's a lot of things that sort of need to take steps in a direction. And I think it really is going to take everybody investing in all of it to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mountain, but it's also a very fascinating mountain to climb. I mean, when you open up that spectrum of opportunity to a lot of people, think of what stories could be possible, right? If you can get some people writing Broadway shows from their perspective. I mean, wow. Yeah. I mean, I think that's just got to happen. I think I'd love to see that shift, you know?
Me too. And I think it's so exciting. I am, again, hopeful. I'm optimistic. I can't wait to see what's next. And if opportunities are spread around and if people are given the platform with which to make art, what that will mean and how that will shift dynamics on both sides of the proscenium. What audiences will that bring in? What will that change in terms of who is now working in these positions? I am just excited about all of it.
Amazing. So I know there's a lot of stage managers and stuff that follow you as well. So you transitioned from being a PSM to a director. What do you think are the key skills of being a PSM that you translates into the director's role?
So much. This is a question very relevant on my mind. I taught my first class of the semester today at Columbia. I teach directing for stage managers to the MFA stage managers there. And this is always how I start the year. I think that there's unbelievable similarity often in the kind of jobs that being a PSM and being a director are. Both jobs require being able to lead a room. Both jobs require, I think, to be successful, unbelievable communication skills, a large amount of empathy and compassion and understanding of human nature. I think that trust is key in that, and earning the company's trust. I know as a PSM is so important, and equally as important as a director in different ways. I also think the partnership between the PSM and the director is often one that gets overlooked as like the most important one in a process, as the two people who are often sort of steering the ship in more ways than one. I feel like one job has always informed how I do the other. And I feel like I always learn something about the experience of directing when I'm sitting in a PSM chair and vice versa. The sort of transition for me, I think, has been a long time coming. It's something that I've wanted to do. I've been sort of straddling both for a really long time. And in the self-reflection of the pandemic and everything else, I sort of realized it was time for me to sort of take a leap one way. I think being a PSM of many big musicals helped me flex a lot of those muscles over time as somebody who was running understudy rehearsal, noting the show, taking care of the artistic integrity of the piece as it lived its life. You know, all of those things I think informed my work as a director and helped fuel that passion. And as a director, I think that my understanding of what it takes to sit in that other chair, the logistics, the sort of micromanaging of the technicalities involved in building a schedule, running a show, the technicalities involved with backstage tracking, the way a show is covered and understudied. I mean, all of those things really come into play in a big way. As a director, I think it's really, really helpful. The most sort of well-rounded directors I know are sometimes the most successful because they have a firm understanding of what it takes to mount a show from every point of view. I pride myself on, when I'm directing, never being the director who during tech says, "What are we waiting for?" Because I know there's something. I think for me, the transition has always been. It's always been a part of me. It's never been something that I've been quiet about. As a PSM, from the time as an ASM, I've always had it as like directing was something I was interested in. And it's not something that sort of appeared for me over time. And there are certainly things I can already say and feel that I miss and will miss about being a PSM. You know, the the sort of close connection that you have to a show as a PSM is something that I think I'll miss, and that relationship. I'm in a little bit of a lucky position right now because as the resident director of a show, I will sort of be very much inside it and around it all of the time. So it's sort of like a nice next thing for me. But I'm excited to see what happens. I also, you know, I say I hung my PSM hat for now. I don't know that it's hung up forever. So, you know,
who knows?
It's all, I'm trying to keep my options open. And I think the worst thing we can do is limit ourselves. So I've tried never to do that. I try not to limit anyone.
That's amazing. I think it's very fascinating too, because I think that bridge of PSM to directing is a construct of how Broadway works and how some stage managers bridge that. And as me historically going from being a production stage manager to more a producer, I would say I'm very different to you because I don't see myself as the person that goes from stage managing to directing, right? I still feel like I'm a stage manager / technical person and you're a stage manager / artistic person, right? Yep. And I think there's two strains of stage managers and both can be equally successful in the PSM realm. But if they go in other positions, there can be that bridge where they're going in different directions. And I think particularly I've met and worked with stage managers who come from that model and they definitely feel more comfortable in the artistic realm, whereas I did a lot of circus. So I was definitely more in the technical realm and I let the artistic people do their thing, right? Like I was never going to be staging the cast on stage and telling them where to go, right?
Right. I know some stage managers who also have gone into sort of producing and event production and things like that. And it's so true that there are there's so many ways you can go. The most important thing I feel like in that conversation is you don't have to do just one thing. You know,
absolutely.
Like just because you were a stage manager doesn't mean you can't also produce. Just because I am directing today doesn't mean I can't design a set tomorrow. You know, I think it's all about making sure that as artists, we are sort of digging into that as theater makers, that we're sort of digging into that and constantly exploring ourselves. It also keeps it, to me, more interesting. I mean, we're so fortunate to be in a career where we sort of carve our own path. We might as well really carve it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to continually an ongoing cultivation of your craft, you know, there's never a place where you're like, well, I can now PSM everything. You know, every time that you take on a new show, like you in Korea, you're like growth spurt of awareness grows and grows and grows. And then that can be applied to other things that you do in the future.
Yep, totally. And I think too, that one of the things I'm most interested in, I mean, the other thing that has always been a sort of part of my path is education and talking to people, meeting people, trying to inspire the next generation, the future of all of this. And the biggest thing that I always try to talk to people about is exactly this, is that we all have the capability and the power to not only shape our trajectory, shape our career, but also shape the industry because of that. And so it's up to all of us to do that, I think.
Yeah. And that our paths are not necessarily linear in that way, right?
No,
it doesn't,
not at all.
Yeah, yeah. Especially with your openness to be like, well, I'll never say I won't PSM again, and then suddenly something happens where you're PSMing something on the other side of the world, right? Like, who knows?
Yeah.
What would you, what would be some advice to those wanting to weave a path towards directing? I mean, you've done it through the production stage management path, but I know there's probably other pathways to get there.
Oh, yeah.
And it's such a competitive and limited spaces for people in that realm, right? So, like, again, where do you start? What's the foundation? How do you get there?
It's a great question. And I, just like every thing in this business, I wish there was like one yellow brick road to one Emerald City and I could tell you to follow it the whole way. I think I think that the way that I sort of found found this is through my relationships with directors and producers. And I built those relationships as a PSM. That's not to say that there's not a million other people who also interact with those kinds of individuals that then could foster those kind of relationships. As a director, I have an agent who I did not have for a long time. And of course, stage managers don't have agents. But as a director, I have one who can sort of help me find my way and find opportunities once in a while. I think it's important, if you want to direct, to know what you want to direct and what kind of stories you want to tell. And that's like the key to starting, right? That you don't ever, I think, want to put yourself in a position where you say to somebody, I want to be a director, and then not know
how to be that,
what you want to do and what kind of stories you want to tell. That was really important to me. I knew, as somebody who was successfully maintaining shows as a PSM, that I could easily redirect versions of those shows because of how my brain works. And I really love the process of taking something that I know really well and rebuilding it on people who haven't done it before, and bringing people through an artistic process that will guide us to the end product that I know needs to be a certain thing. It was really important to me before I took this step that I've taken and sort of focused on this, that I was poised, ready, and clear on when somebody, whether it be my agent, a producer, an artistic director of a regional theater, a playwright, anybody asks me, oh, well, like, if you could, what's your dream show to direct? Why? Or what have you read lately that has inspired you? What kind of stories do you want to tell? Where do you want to work? How, I wanted to make sure I was ready to sort of dig in and answer those questions. And I feel like that's probably the most important advice I can give, is make sure that you know what inspires you and how you want to inspire other people. Because that's what a director's got to do.
Yeah, absolutely. What a wonderful answer. Matt, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation today. I really, truly appreciate you taking the time to share with us your experiences in career and now in Moulin Rouge and your advice on directing. It's been wonderful. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me, Anna. This is so great. I always love getting to talk to you. So thank you. That's
awesome. Now, if our audience are looking to sort of follow you on social media or reach out and ask any questions, is that possible? And how would they find you?
Totally. I am on Instagram at MattyD0804. I'm active on there. You can find me and follow me, and I will always respond to messages if I see them, when I see them, I should say. And I also have a website, www.matt-dicarlo.com, and you can reach me on there as well.
Awesome. Well, I wish you all the best for the opening of Moulin Rouge, and I definitely, when I'm allowed to get on a plane, will come and see it. Yes. And hopefully you'll still be there, and we can hang out in person. And thank you again
meet
for
in person.
I know, wouldn't that be a novelty?
Thanks so much.
Wonderful. You guys have a great evening, and thanks everybody for joining. Bye-bye now.
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.